there's a bit where you describe the kind of difference here as being fear versus love, which hugely resonated with me. I think that after all the kind of processing of all this information, I think that's ultimately what I come down to as well, is as we've said, that the kind of agriculturalist, or Nixon's mindset in this analogy, is based around fear, and that's why you're kind of looking into the future, because things aren't okay and you need to kind of race into the future, versus a mode of being in the present, trying to live life as kind of trying to maximize well-being and kind of interpersonal flourishing. And yeah, I think that it's interesting to me that the fear side, in the past, I'd often wondered if this was something that emerged very, very gradually through kind of cultural evolution after the emergence of agriculture. But then reading about these people in the Pacific Northwest that you mentioned, who it's not that there's a giant civilization with skyscrapers and everything, but it's just the fact of the hoarded, of the kind of stockpiled salmon is enough to create conflict. And it starts to make me wonder if this is something, the fear side has always been with us, and has always been something that could come out. And another thing in the book that relates to this was, you talk about the idea of this kind of fierce egalitarianism in hunter-gatherer groups. And it's kind of it seems like a kind of a constant keeping on top of the potentiality for some sociopathic or narcissistic or psychopathic person to start to try to dominate. And there's a great example, I'm not sure what the culture was, but where if some young guy kind of catches kills a huge animal, then the other guys will kind of basically say, like, oh, what'd you drag us out here for this skin and bones, right? Because they know to minimize that his ego could get out of the way, and he could start thinking he should boss other people around, right? So do you think that shadow side, I guess, has always been inside us?
Yeah, I think so. There's a wonderful book about this by Christopher Boehm called Hierarchy in the Forest. And he's really the best known expert on the sorts of mechanisms that you're talking about. And what he says in that, he makes a nuanced argument where he says that humans are hierarchical beings, like all social primates are, right? Chimpanzees, bonobos, gorillas, like baboons, we all live within social hierarchies. And that what our ancestors did that's very interesting is that they developed anti-hierarchical mechanisms to keep that natural impulse in check. So as you say, there are mechanisms. I think the particular story you're talking about is the Kung San in the Kalahari, but I remember in writing the book, I chose different examples from different cultures all over the world, and they all have the same sorts of things. They have the sort of ridicule that you're talking about, where if someone starts getting too big for his britches, people start joking about, oh, hey, he thinks he's a big man over here, and, that's sort of knocking him down a few pegs. If that doesn't work, then a shaman or an elder might take him aside and say, hey, you need to calm down a little bit. We all depend on each other here. We're all in this together. And if that doesn't work, then that person can very easily have a hunting accident, because everybody's armed and everyone's very adept with their weapons. So, I don't care how big and strong you are, you get an arrow in the back, you're going to fall just as hard as anyone else. So, Christopher Boehm talks about how the fact that our ancestors were all armed really negates the sort of innate leverage that a bigger, stronger person might have. And it's had really interesting effects on our evolution as a species, because it, of course, takes the evolutionary advantage off these sorts of purely physiological advantages. So yeah, it's quite interesting. And I think you're right. I think there's always that impulse to try to coerce other people to do what you want, or to try to get possessive or, take a little more for yourself or for your friend or your woman or whatever. But hunter-gatherer societies are extremely sensitive to those things. And, hoarding food or not distributing food equitably is one of the biggest mistakes you can make in a hunter-gatherer society. And of course, those societies are built around mutual cooperation and mutual dependence. So if you offend the group and you get expelled from the group, you're in big trouble. We're not a species that lives well alone. So it's essentially a death sentence if you're expelled from your group.
Yeah. I mean, I feel like if we're going to integrate the lessons learned from our kind of hunter-gatherer past, this is one of the things we'll have to do, and it'll be quite tricky. In a world where someone like Donald Trump can be elected president, we don't have this ethos of that should be someone who triggers all of our alarm bells of oh no, we shouldn't be egging that guy on, we should be reining him in. But I think this should be happening it is happening in some communities where there's raised awareness around kind of narcissistic emotional abuse and these kinds of toxic personality traits. But I guess I would like to see that spread globally, where that's a real kind of accepted piece of our culture, that we're not talking about ostracizing these people. We're talking about kind of helping them. And, this is where kind of psychedelics can potentially come in, right? That you take someone who's really, their ego is too big, and famously, psychedelics are pretty good at destroying one's ego if used in the right way. Do you think that could be a kind of a way to approach it?
I'm very hesitant to prescribe psychedelics for that sort of thing, because I agree with you. I think, you said if used in the right way, I think they can be ego dissolving, which is one of the best things about them. But I also see a lot of instant shamans walking around these days. Yeah. I see a lot of ego inflation, and someone like Donald Trump, who's dealing with deep psychological wounds from, a mother who was not present, a father who abused him and, could never be pleased. He would never get praise from his father. And I don't mean to psychoanalyze the guy, but I don't know that he would actually benefit, from psychedelics. I think he might just take it to the next level. So I don't know. I mean, I'm a big believer in psychedelic psychotherapy with, for the right person in the right setting and, the right therapist and all that. But yeah, I think they can cut both ways. But you mentioned, as far as politics goes, an extension of what I was talking about earlier is that in hunter-gatherer politics, people become leaders because they're respected. So the whatever power they have is power that accrues to them because a lot of people really want to hear what they have to say. There's this famous line in the movies where, the Europeans land and they find some Indian, they say, "Take us to your chief." And there's always confusion about that. And there's confusion, who signs the treaties and this and that, because there is no chief generally. In most societies, native societies, there are different leaders for different things. So there's someone whose opinion carries a lot of weight as to whether or not we should go to war. There's someone else whose opinion carries a lot of weight if someone's ill. And what should we do about that? How can we help them? Someone else might be much more respected in terms of deciding where to go hunting this season, or whether we should plant corn along the river. All the whole political structure is very fluid, and it's very much not about coercive power. It's about whose advice carries the most weight, basically. But everyone has the right to say whatever they want. And if you disagree vehemently with the decision that's made, you have the right to split off from the group and go join another group. technical term is fission fusion social structures. They come together and they split apart and they, coalesce in different groups. And so there's sort of movement between the different bands. And normally there are seasonal get-togethers where the bands will all join in one place and different, people fall in love and they go off with this group because their mother's getting older and they want to be with her or whatever it is. So that's sort of the typical social fluidity. And in that sort of society, anyone who expresses a desire to be a leader, somebody who says, I'm in charge here, is considered, as you say, pathetic and in need of help. It's not a sign of leadership. We call it, in America, there's this expression, does he have the fire in the belly? Does he really want it? Does he have enough desire to really see it through to become a senator and win the election? That's the last person you would want in a position of leadership, right? There's something wrong with that guy. And I think it's the same, we were talking earlier about wealth and how the same drive that often brings someone to a position of great wealth, is revealed at that point as being pathological. I think it's the same for power. It's the same for, basically acquiring more than you need of anything, from my perspective, is a sign of a psychopathology.